Hi everybody, welcome back to the Claremont Classic Garage. Now that we've got the, I guess we call it the maintenance inspection done on our race car after its slumber in the barn, we're going to go ahead now and just go over all of our settings. So where the wheels are pointing and all that sort of stuff. And I'll try to give you a very, very, very brief explanation of all the stuff that you can adjust on these little cars, because quite frankly, you could probably make a 100-hour video going over all this stuff, but I'll just show you a lot of the stuff that we can monkey around with, and I'm really no expert on most of it. It's a lot of trial and error, but you know, that's what we got to do. The simplest adjustment you can make is tire pressure. The car, all four corners of the car run a different pressure in the tire because we're trying to get each tire to do its share of the work in relation to the amount of weight that's on that tire. Each corner of the car weighs different and reacts differently in the turns. So you'll find what works for you, but I would say a good place to start would be in the upper 30s on the right front, the left front and the right rear in the mid 20s, and the left rear in the mid to upper teens. If you've got a, reasonably handling car, those pressures will be pretty darn close to what you need. Now, I'm talking about radial tires on a front wheel drive car. If you've got a Mustang or you're running bias tires like Hoosiers or American Racers, that's going to be totally different for you. I have no idea. Never been there. Never done that. Don't ask me. Another thing that's kind of directly related to tire pressure is camber. So camber is the inward or outward tilt of the wheel. So basically, what you're trying to do is find the right combination of camber and air pressure so that when this car comes off the racetrack, 3 places across the tread, you're getting the same temperature reading all the way across. Then you know this tire is working properly and doing its fair share of the work. It is something you got to kind of sneak up on. You'll see guys with this much camber, so they figure they need that much. And it's not always that way. You need to use your instruments. A good air pressure gauge and a good tire temperature gauge will help you figure that out. How we adjust the camber, every car is different, of course. On this car, we've got a cam bolt on the lower bolt that holds the knuckle to the strut. And if we find that's not enough, we grind the back of the knuckle there and slot this hole a little bit. And that lets us lean the thing over. It's beyond what I can measure in degrees with my crude alignment stuff, but this wheel is laid over about 3 inches off of plumb, and that seems to be what works best on this car. On the rear, we have the same deal. The top bolt is a cam bolt, the bottom bolt is a through bolt, and you turn that. Now, I am able to get all the camber I need with the cam bolt on this car. We're limited to what we're allowed on the rear. There's no rule for the front. You can have whatever makes your car work it. But on the back, we're only allowed 2 inches off plumb, which is, that's something new because before we were only allowed 3 degrees. And let me tell you, that's not much. Caster is something I guess you could also mess around with if you wanted to. And that's the forward or rearward tilt of the center line of the 2 pivot points of the steering, whether it be ball joints or a ball joint at the bottom and a strut bearing at the top. To change it on these strut cars is not too easy. You either have to move the hat or the top of the strut around by filing holes or literally cutting it out and relocating it, or moving the lower control arm. I honestly, all the years I've been racing, have never messed with that. I've just got stuck with camber the other adjustments. The next thing we're going to talk about is tow. Now, normally on a road car, especially one with linkage steering, like an old rear-wheel drive car, you would have them towed in a tiny little bit because there's so much play in everything. Once the car starts driving, all the play gets taken up, and it would set the wheels dead straight. These front-wheel drive cars probably get set a little more dead straight because there's no linkage and less stuff to have play. But what we find on the circle track is that they like to be towed out a little bit. Depending on the track, every track is going to want a different setting. Every driver is going to have a different feel. But basically, you run the thing down through the corner, and if you hear the front wheels kind of screeching, even though the car feels like it's sticking good, you probably need to adjust your tow. And a short, tight little track, we'll run it upwards of 3/8 of an inch towed out. And if we go to a great big fast track, we'll find that starts to close up and might get almost right down to nothing. You have to remember that with these cars, stock cars, I guess any race car, anything that you do to help it turn usually will compromise straight line performance. And anything you do to help it in a straight line, aside from the engine, of course, anything you do with the chassis that helps it in a straight line will hinder it in the turns. So we're always trying to find that delicate balance between making it turn good and not having a bunch of drag down the straightaway. So once you've got your front tow set up, you can maybe start thinking about monkeying with the rear tow. The rear tow is something that, depending on your car, can be easy to adjust or difficult to adjust. On our other race car, which is Daytona, it's got a solid axle in the back. We call it a trailer axle. And the stubs that the wheels go on are held on with 4 bolts. And you adjust the camber and the tow by putting shims in behind there. And it's a big, long process because every time you got to take the brakes off and go through this whole big trial and error shenanigans. On this car, it's not so bad. It has these lateral rods, or tow rods you want to call them, that go from the center of the car out to the bottom of the uprights there. Now, in its factory incarnation, you can see here this adjuster. It's got an eccentric in there that gives you a little bit of leeway in setting the tow. But we're allowed to run adjustable links like this, so that gives you a whole lot of adjustment on the tow. Now, what you got to keep in mind when you're doing this is setting the rear tow, if you want it towed out, is fine. You could accomplish that. But you need to reference it to the center line of the car. You need to know at least one wheel is dead straight, dead parallel with the center line of the car, and you key the other wheel off that, or else you're going to be lost, because you could set the thing towed out, but if this wheel's already towed in a little bit, and then you tow it out 1/4 of an inch, look what you've just done. Or likewise the other way, or towing it in. It can become a disaster fast. With the rear tow, you don't have to have the rear wheels towed in or out necessarily, as much as you could maybe decide that you need a little more action from your blade on the right rear, and you could kind of tow the back wheels out, turn one this way and the other one that way. So even though they're still basically net zero, what you've done is you've made the car dog track a little bit, and you get the end of the spoiler out in the wind a little bit to get a little more weight on that right rear. There's a million things you can do with adjustment, and it's only limited by your imagination and how many laps of practice time you can get. There's no magic formula. I'm on the forums all the time, and guys are saying, what's the trick setup for this? What's the trick? There is no trick setup. It's what works for you ain't going to work for me, and vice versa. So by all means, take advice from other guys. If a guy that, there's a fast guy, and you could trust that if you ask him a question, he's actually going to give you good information and not make something up. Just take it as it works well for him. Maybe I can take that and work it a little bit and make it work for me. But it may be a good starting point. Anyway, that's it for that. On to our next adjustment. Now we're going to move to the most mysterious part of any race car. It doesn't matter what your discipline of racing is springs and sway bars. Everybody's got a different opinion on them, and everybody's right, because however they figured it out so it works for them, it's right. Anyway, as far as springs go, this car, the factory original springs are long gone. These are 5x8 racing springs that I bought. And I've got, every spring on this car has a different rate, and I couldn't tell you what they are because I can't even remember, but it seems to be what worked pretty well. What you can do with springs, even if you're stuck with stock ones, you want to increase the rate a little bit if you figure that's what you need to do. So you can do that. Oh, look at that. Nice old Chevy truck with a 4-speed. You can cut a couple of coils off. It'll shorten the spring, which will lower the car, which you probably have to do anyway because you lighten it up by gutting it. And it'll increase the spring rate. Another thing you can use at your disposal is a spring rubber. So this works in two ways. You can use it as a spring spacer. If it's in the car but outside of the spring, all that's going to do is increase your ride height, and basically you're putting more weight on that corner of the car. The other way you can use this is to actually put it in the coil, right? You put the spring rubber in between the coil, and what that does is that immobilizes that coil and increases the spring rate without changing the spring. So again, trial and error. Don't ask me the nuances of it because I don't know. I've just mucked around with it for so long, I kind of have an idea what I need to do. We can also mess with our sway bars. So what we've done here is I've made an adjustable link for this end. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. It's just we cut the original stem between the two eyelets and replaced it with a piece of threaded rod. So we can, making it go this way, preloads this corner a little bit, and shrinking it unloads the corner a little bit. Now, that is not gospel. It depends on whether your sway bar is above, like this one is, or below the center line of the axle, because then the adjustment, if it's below the center line of the axle, the adjustment will be backwards. The same with the front. We made a similar thing on the front. So we can, you more use the sway bars for fine tuning. You do your rough adjustment with springs and rubbers and stuff, and then you fine tune it with the sway bars. Last thing I want to talk about is this thing. In the mini stock cars, you'll see some cars have a blade, some cars don't have a blade. Again, it all comes down to how the car is set up, how the driver likes the feel of it, what adjustments they've got built into it. I know I've always had a blade on both of my cars, and one time we went to a big fast track and we thought that the spoiler might be slowing us down on the straightaways, so we took it off. I went out for 3 laps of practice and came back white as a ghost with eyes that big and put it back on. So yeah, it does do something on these little cars. You got to remember, these front wheel drive cars, just by their nature, they're very light in the back end. You can never achieve that nice 50-50 weight balance front and rear like you would like to. It's impossible when you're trying to get them gutted down for weight. I mean, I could put 1,200 pounds of ballast in it, I guess, and get the front and back 50-50. But now the poor engine has to drag that all around the track. So we rely on this guy to make up for some of the weight that's missing on the back. And I don't know if having a back window in the car or not helps that with the air coming over the roof and all that. It just mostly it has a back window because the car looked terrible without it. So I don't know if there's any actual advantage to having it or not. It sure makes it hot in there, I'll tell you that. Anyway, that's the kind of basic overview of the adjustments that we have available to us. I'm sure there's a lot more stuff that you could adjust on too. When you're putting these together, any hole that you could find that you could file into a slotted hole, it's probably going to be good in the long run because you can move things around and try stuff and whatnot. But anyway, there's probably stuff on here that's adjustable that I even forgot to talk about. But I've pretty much covered the basics of what you'll find in most, mini stocks. Up here in Canada, the mini stock rules are a little toned down to what my American friends are allowed to do. But over there, they're pretty serious race cars. Up here, the emphasis is still on the stock part of mini stock. But anyway, in the next video, we're going to get the wheels back on, get this thing on the ground, and we'll get some tools out and we'll actually check all of our adjustments and see where we're at. Anyway, until then, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. This is Kevin checking out from the Claremont Classic Garage. So long, and happy Canada Day. And happy Independence Day to all my friends south of the 49th.